Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this masterclass at the Gifted World online community. We're a community that has existed since January of 2024 this year. Our goal is to enable students, teachers, and parents have a supportive community that enables you to reach your full potential, where the you is mostly geared at students. But whatever age you are, as long as you're a curious mind, we're here to help keep you challenged, help keep you engaged. So I will briefly share my screen to show you our platform, tell you a little bit of what else we've got going on, and then hand it over to so this is our website, www.giftedworld.org. You can see that we hold different kinds of events. One is these free masterclasses. We do about 2 every month. Today's masterclass is over here, and the next one I will share with you in a bit. We also put up these challenges in blog posts. The most recent one is finishing soon, but it's about critically analyzing a viral WhatsApp forward. And we've done all kinds of things, including how do you split up apartment electricity bills fairly? How do astronauts talk in space if their radios are not working, etc. We've been founded by a group of by 3 different organizations that between them have a lot of experience in helping students who are gifted and talented in different ways. And we also, in addition to these masterclasses and blogs, this month we've started online courses, which are focused on helping you to learn by yourself. We've currently got 4 courses running that started in August, and there are another 4 that are starting in September. These are paid courses, but you also, along the way, we have mentors, we have teaching assistants who have structured really unique offerings. For example, this course on pre-algebra and algebraic thinking is meant for students in grades 5 and 6, and really teaches you algebra from the ground up, right, with images. And it's taught by a really amazing maths teacher called Jayashree. And just like that, we've got our strength is what we've got a really great network of mentors who do things together. In addition to these online courses, we also have just finished a series of different residential programs that are not loading. Okay, we've just finished a series of different residential programs that tend to happen in summer in Manipal, in Zanzibar, and in different places. So these are very, if you really want to be engaged heavily, these residential programs are a lovely place to learn. And those are held by different partners. Gifted World ourselves don't host it, but GenWise, educational initiatives, and the Northwestern Center for Talent Development host such events. Finally, our next masterclass coming up 2 weeks from now is a really curious one that about how distance works in different aspects of life. I'm very excited for it because it's in fact not being done by a Gifted World mentor, but by a parent of one of our student community, a parent who enjoyed what we were doing so much that he said, hey, I've made this really curious observation and I'd love to share it with more people and see where can we do this together. So we've been helping Karthik develop this session, and we're really looking forward to doing it 2 weeks from now. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over today's session to Dr. Saurabh Mahajan. So Saurabh has been a friend of mine for a really long time. He was a couple of years senior to me when I joined college in Pune. And he was like a very wise person who knew a lot of biology. And so life has gone on, and then we both sort of studied in the same place, worked in the same place, and have worked a lot together, especially doing a bunch of online classes and engagements during COVID, where we were trying. And what constantly amazes me about Saurabh is how committed he is to teaching and teaching well, right? Not just from a place of, oh, I want to be a good teacher. But using science, using evidence, using inquiry to structure classrooms for students to learn by themselves, whether it's lab sessions or teaching bioinformatics, teaching high schoolers, or doing stuff for undergraduates, going out and measuring what bacteria are in lakes, all kinds of things. So I'm very thrilled that Saurabh is here and giving a masterclass at Gifted World. Thank you so much for doing this. And with that, for all of you who are curious to know more about evolution, I present to you Saurabh Mahajan.
Thank you, Siddharth. Yeah, it's been a really fun journey. Uh, Lots of things together, and I'm very happy that I got this opportunity to give a master class to all these brilliant students. So I'm also very excited about this. Evolution is one of the topics that's kind of close to my heart. I've done some research about it and also studied it quite a lot. And I like sharing what I've learned with everyone. So I hope that you all will get something interesting, learn something interesting out of today's masterclass. And I hope that you will also leave with a lot of questions, some of which we will try to answer here. But I hope that you will, continue asking questions about evolution and learning more and more. So that's the goal for today. So let's get started. I'll just share my screen. At any
Saurabh,
point,
sorry, quick question. You did
yeah,
want a poll about ages. Should I
yeah. Yeah,
launch
please,
that?
can we, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we can
So
just have a,
yeah, on your screen, you'll see a brief poll. If you could fill that out, that will be helpful. We're asking you for your age, where you are joining this call from. Just the name of a city or town is sufficient, and your email address so that we can reach out to you. If there's any follow-up after this event, we will send you an email on that email address. If you're not able to use the poll, you can just answer these questions in the chat. In case you're having any difficulty using the poll, you can just send a message in the chat. If you don't want to share your email address with everyone, you can just send that message privately to me. Okay.
yeah, great. I think we have about 20 responses. So
Yeah, so take another 5-10 seconds to wrap up, and then we will move on with the session. Okay, thank you all for answering. Those of you who haven't filled it in yet, you can just hit submit. Just make sure there's some text in the two options. It's okay if you've not filled it all out. Thank you so much. And back to Saurabh. It looks like the maximum number of people are age 11. So age 10, 11, 12 is most people here. So that is good to know.
yeah, great.
Thank you all for that. And back to Saurabh.
Thank you. So, yeah, so one thing which I was not very sure was how much of or what about evolution you may have studied in school or, in other places if you have found out about evolution from, internet if you use it. So what we will do is I will be sharing with you some stories and so on. If something is quite difficult to understand, you can just leave a comment in the chat box. And then if you want some more explanation for something, or if you have some questions, you can all put that in the chat box and then we'll address it accordingly. Okay, so let me share my screen. Yes, you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay. So I'm going to start with some stories that you may have already heard about when you hear about evolution or study about evolution. And so one such story is about giraffes. And we all know giraffes are quite tall. I think the tallest probably animals out there right now. And we also hear, if you have studied evolution, that they were not that tall in the past, or maybe there were no giraffes in the past. But then slowly over time, they have got these long necks, right? And one of the reasons we often hear is that the place where giraffes live, that is in Africa, uh, there are trees and there are grasses, and then there was animals which were grazing on the grass first, and then some of them wanted to reach the trees, or some of them could reach some of the trees, and uh, they tried to reach the trees, extending their necks, and then they could get more food, and therefore they were successful. And then their neck became extended, and then this kept on happening again and again and again. And then over a long, long time, we see what we have, the giraffes of today with long, long, long necks, right? So this is probably one story that you have heard about evolution. Then there's another story which is often quoted in textbooks sometimes, is about these small insects called moths. They look quite big here, but that's because of the photo. But these are tiny insects. You must have, of course, seen moths. This is one particular species of moth, which is found in Britain. And the story goes like this, that initially, when this is about 17th or 18th century, uh, industrial revolution had not happened yet. So there were not the number of industries that we see today were not there. And the environment was beautiful, it was clean. And the trees where these moths live, they were also very clean. And therefore, the moths were colored white so that they could match the bark of the tree, and then the birds wouldn't be able to see them, and then they would survive more, they could grow more and reproduce more, and their population would increase. But then the story goes that what happened during the 18th century was, as more and more industries started developing, they started emitting soot, which is smoke, right? And then slowly, as the industrial revolution progressed, there was so much pollution that happened in some places because of these industries, that the trees became covered with this soot coming out of the industries. And then these white moths, which were white in color, when they resided on those trees, which were now black in color, they became very visible because it was a contrasting color, and the birds could spot them very easily. And so they were killed by the birds and eaten by the birds easily. And then there were also very few number of black moths initially, but then as the trees grew darker, the bark grew darker, these became more camouflaged. The birds were not able to see the black ones now, and so they were able to survive more, and then their population grew. So before industrial revolution, we had white colored moths, and then after industrial revolution, there were more of black colored moths. So this is also what a story that we hear often about evolution.
Saurabh, multiple people are saying that your voice is too low.
Oh, I see. How about now? Okay, give me 1 second. I see. Is it better now?
Yes, much louder.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. So yes, we have talked about the giraffes, we have talked about the moths, and so much contrast, right? Giraffes are really big, moths are really small, but the story is kind of similar. They are changing. And then some of you at least may have heard about this another story about these birds called finches. And these are birds from a different place. Giraffes are from Africa, these moths are from Britain. These finches are from an island in South America. It's called Galapagos. And what happened in these islands was there were birds in the distant past which had a particular size, and they had a beak with a particular shape. And then some of these birds, they went to different islands, and then they started feeding on different kind of food. And some of them, they specialized in feeding on insects. Some of them specialized on feeding on bigger insects. Some of them specialized feeding on seeds, small seeds, large seeds, and so on. And then for every kind of food, there was a type of beak which could work better, and therefore these species acquired the different shapes of beaks, and then they became kind of different birds that we see here, for example. Okay. And these species are called, actually specially called Darwin's finches, uh, because of Darwin. We'll come to who he was if you have not heard about it. And then finally, I have this story about the mustard plant here in the center. This is the wild mustard plant. Mustard, I hope all of you know, we eat the seeds, the mustard seeds, and sometimes we make vegetable out of it from the leaves and so on. And of course, the oil, mustard oil, we use in cooking. So it is this plant which is very widely used in kitchen. And the story about this plant is very interesting. We all have also, I'm sure, have had cabbage. I don't know how many of you like it. You must have also had cauliflower. Some of you must have also had broccoli and then kale and all these different types of vegetables, right? What you may not know is that these very different looking vegetables, think of mustard, it has yellow flowers and really tiny seeds, and cabbage, which has just a lot of leaves like packed densely together. Cauliflower, which has a lot of flowers densely packed together, which are white in color. And then you have broccoli, which is green in color, and kale is just like loose leaves, right? But all these different vegetables are actually the same type of plant or same species, as we call in biology, of plant. Uh, but they look very, very different. And the idea is that all of these vegetables, they have actually uh, a long, long time ago, maybe few thousands of years ago, they were all this plant which is here in the center, but then humans have actually changed them in some way and made them into these different vegetables. So that's the other story, right? So these are all, you will realize that these are all examples of where there were some organisms in the past, and then they have changed over time, and they used to look different in the past. Now they look different right now, the animals that we know. And this is what we many times understand by, this is what is evolution, right? It's a change that happens in organisms over time. Okay. So let's keep these stories in mind, and then we are going to discuss more about evolution, that we just said is like a change that happens over time. Okay. And then we will come back to these stories later, and maybe I can ask you some questions and you can ask me some questions about these. Okay. So if you have studied evolution by any chance, you would have come across this word called natural selection. Okay, and this is, we sometimes call it as theory of natural selection or theory of evolution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is. Oops. So let me start with this picture, which is part of the poster which was made for this masterclass. It's right at the bottom, and then we have the series of organisms starting from, I have no idea what this is. This looks like a starfish. This is an octopus, some other kind of fish, something that looks like a crocodile, dinosaurs. This is probably the saber tooth, and then monkeys, apes, uh, prehistoric humans, and then modern humans, what we are used to see right now, right? So this is many times we will come across the picture of evolution like this. Like, it started with very simple organisms, and then over time the organisms became more and more complex and larger sometimes, and they adapted to various environments, and then they kept changing over time, and then evolution has been progressing over time, right? So that's the picture we see a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little more in detail about this part of the picture, just about the monkeys. Again, this is, I'm sure many of us have heard this, that humans have evolved from monkeys, right? That's what we hear. So somewhere in between, these very modern humans and then maybe slightly older humans, were these two old people who actually gave a theory. Now, theory is a kind of an explanation of, we see something, which is, we see these different kinds of organisms, and then the question was, from where did all these organisms come from? And these two people, they gave a theory about it, or they tried to explain, okay, this would have happened in the past, and they came up with this theory of evolution. On the left is, of course, Charles Darwin, and then on the right is Alfred Russel Wallace. Although we know Darwin much more, both of these people working parallelly, at first they didn't know that they were both thinking about the same questions and trying to find answers to the same question. But then towards the, after many actually decades of working independently, they ended up realizing that, oh, they were asking the same questions, and they were also found very similar answers in the theory of evolution. So these are the two people. Whatever we are going to discuss, it was proposed, or it was explained by these two people 150 or more years ago, okay, around 1850s. Okay, so the same picture, what we saw, a different version of that. I'm just zooming into that. And there are what we know as old world monkeys, and then there are these funny named monkeys, and this pongo is again another uh, class of apes, and then we know gorillas, and pan is the name of scientific name of chimpanzees, and homo sapiens is of course the name of modern humans. And again, as I was saying, that we usually or many times hear of evolution, that there were the monkeys first, and then we had the apes, and then we had gorilla, chimpanzee, and then humans, right? So past to present. So this is one of the ways in which evolution is explained. However, this is not really what happened, right? And many times people question, if chimpanzees became humans, then how come there are chimpanzees still around, right? We see them in the zoos. We know that there are chimpanzees in Africa. Some of you may have seen them. So people say, if this is really true, how come all these species still exist, right? And that's a valid question, but the answer to that lies in this point, that time really doesn't go like this from past to present, or these are not the oldest species and these are not the newest species. Rather, all of these species are actually in the present, right? This we all, of course, can see and agree on, because we have the humans right now, we have chimpanzees, we have gorillas, and we have all these different species of monkeys still existing, right? That no one can question, like we can see them. And so these are definitely in the past. So then what happened in the sorry, these are all in the present. So then the question is, what really happened in the past? If they have not changed into each other, or they have not evolved into each other, then what happened? So what we know because of Darwin and Wallace, and then many studies after them, is that evolution progresses in this way. That let's take the example of chimpanzees and humans. The present species arose from ancestral species which lived sometime in the past, right? And then we can, in this kind of diagram, it's represented here, that this was what we call as the last common ancestor of these two species. So just like in humans, we have our ancestors like the previous generations. Uh, uh, this we can think of like an ancestor of the two species, and then this ancestor and then the ancestor of gorilla, they had another ancestor sometime in the past, and then all of those ancestors, and then the ancestor of these apes, they had ancestors in the past, and then so on, back and back and back, so that it's a series of ancestors which keep going back. So that's, you can think of it that way when you're looking from present to past. If you what happened from past to present, you think of it this way, that okay, there was a common ancestor of all these species which exist right now, long ago in the past. Here it says 25 million years ago, and then what happened was they split, right? That's what this diagram shows, this tree like diagram, that like the branches split in a tree. The ancestor population also split into two, and then one population over time. So the ancestor is here, then over time this population became what we today see as these monkey species. And then the other ancestor, it again, after a few million years, it again split like branches into two different populations. One of those populations, it became what we today see as these species. And then on the other side, this ancestor again split, and so on and so on and so on, right? So what today we know is evolution actually doesn't progress as a linear kind of succession of change in species. Rather, it's like a tree where there are common ancestors in the past, and then they branch into two, and then those ancestors, again, the populations branch into two, and then again they branch, and so on, right? And they don't have to branch into two. Sometimes in a very short time, you can, from the same common ancestor, you can get multiple species. Okay, so this is what today we know is how evolution happens, and this I have shown for only the part of one part of the whole diversity of animals and plants and other organisms that we have on earth right now. But what we today know is that the same process applies to all the different organisms on earth that we know right now. And I will come to, okay, I think I'll show you the
Sir,
whole tree of life later.
I have a doubt.
Yes, maybe this is a good time to take some questions.
What were those red dotted lines which led to question marks?
Interesting. One second. Let me go back.
If you
Let
go
me
back
share
in the
my
table,
screen.
you can see two red dotted lines, and they
And
have question marks leading to them.
Yes.
Those
Okay.
ones between
Yeah.
gorilla and pan.
Yes. So what I think it shows. So okay, before the red lines, let's talk about the gray lines. So what the gray lines, I think you may have figured it out. What the gray lines are showing are other species which came from the ancestors in the past, and we know them. How do we know about them? We know them. We know about them because of fossils. You all know what are fossils. Like here, it's skeletons which we find in the soil deep down, or in other places, oceans, etc. So we know that there were other species which existed, which also branched from the past ancestors, but they became extinct, right? They became extinct. And today there are no animals which represent those branches, because their populations, they just died down because of various reasons. Again, we may or may not be able to say what were the exact reasons, but that's what happened. So I think, yeah, so the good question about the red lines, I think what these are showing is that there may have been other answers, other branches, sorry, in the past where we don't have the fossils, right? So that's why there are these question marks saying that were there other populations where they have not left any fossils? And that's, it's very possible that there were, but again, because there are no fossils, we may not be able to know about them. And so those are, things which are lost to us today. Unless, research is always going on, there are people still doing archaeology and finding newer and newer fossils. So maybe it's possible that in the future you might find fossils of those ancient extinct branches. So I think that's what it shows. Yeah, are there more questions? Say that maybe we can I just stop sharing and...
Yeah, so Saurabh, there have been, I think you can deal with some of these later because you are covering it, but just wanted to say,
Okay.
there's how many years did it take the giraffe to evolve? And there have been questions about why do some species evolve quickly while others stay the same for millions of years? And then there's
Okay.
also one question regarding the moths, saying, is the moth example evolution, or is it just that one part of the species died out and the other part of the species survived? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Excellent. So I think all these questions will, most of them except for the giraffe, I think these questions will get answered. If they don't get answered, you please point them out later again, either Siddharth or whoever asked the question. So the question about the moths, the question about why some species evolve fast, why some evolve slow, and those questions will get answered. About the giraffes, again, so the time of these the time of these ancestors, it depends on the fossils, right? And there are methods by which we can find out when those fossils would have existed in the past. You may have heard of radiocarbon dating. These techniques are called dating methods. And so using radioactive carbon. And then based on that, we get this. So for giraffes, I think it's a similar timeline to humans. It's a few tens of millions of years. Now, one thing we should understand, it's not always possible to give an exact time. So there are always like some uncertainty, or we can't know exactly when it happened. But that's, so it's not hundreds of millions years ago, it's tens of millions of years ago. That's for giraffe. That's how much time it took. Yeah. Okay. So I think, rest of the questions, whatever we said, we can talk about later. Some of you are asking for the links. I think you can, I can share all the links later in one common document.
We can send it by email to all the attendees. We can share the presentation if that's okay.
Sir, you said there are different methods to find out the date of fossils or how old they are. So can you list some of them, like one or two? I just want to know.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, I think one of the ways are like checking the date of the carbon present in the fossils.
Yes. Yeah. So there you have one method
like
is
some amount of carbon in the fossils. If we
yeah.
can
So
see like
in the interest of time,
the age of that carbon, maybe you can add it up to the correct date of the fossils.
Correct. Yeah. So I think what we can do is I can quickly answer some of the questions, and then later we can have a discussion on all of these questions. I will quickly answer and then move ahead. So yes, carbon is there, carbon in the fossil. So based on what kind of carbon is there in the fossil versus comparing it to the environment, you can figure out how old is the fossil. The other thing is much simpler. You look at the layer of soil in which you find the fossil, and then you can date the soil layer, not the fossil itself, but you can indirectly say that, okay, if it was found in a layer of soil that was so many million years ago, then that must be the age of the fossil, right? And that is again done on based on radioactive, other kind of radioactive materials, using other kind of radioactive materials. So it's an indirect method. The carbon dating is a direct method, but it cannot be applied to much older samples. Okay. So let's go ahead, and now what I will do is I will talk about one smaller part of this whole tree. Now that we have understood that this is how evolution happens, things, there are common ancestors, populations, they branch, and then they become two separate kind of branches. So how does that happen? Like, how come they become two different kinds of branches, right? So let's focus on only this part, just as an example. So this is present day chimpanzees and present day humans. We said they have a common ancestor a few million years ago, and we know this by some of the fossils. Now, what must have happened is that this ancestral population, okay, and again, let me emphasize that this is a population of animals. So this is not like one individual which evolves into a completely different looking individual, but this is an entire population. And what does happen in ecology, and even now it keeps happening, is populations can separate from each other for various reasons. For example, they could migrate to a different region because of let's say scarcity of food, or maybe droughts, or some other environmental reasons. They could move. So that's one. Another is some new, in evolution or in the history of the earth, what can happen is the geography can change, and it can create barriers between two different regions, and then population in this region remains on this side, population in that region remains on that side. So this has, for example, happened in some of the huge rivers in South America. There are species which are found only on this side, species which are found only on this side, because they can't cross the river, right? So those are some of the ways it can happen. And I think we are seeing one example of that in Bangalore, where we have a huge big flyover, and there's a lot of traffic on the flyover. So auto wallahs from this side, they don't go to that side, and auto wallahs from that side, they don't come to this side. So if that happens for organisms in the environment, then you can imagine they will become separate, right? And when they become separate, what happens is each of those populations which are now separated, they can undergo independent, and I have highlighted the word independent because there's no connection between them now. So whatever changes happen in one population are different from whatever changes happen in the other population. And this happens by, some of you may have heard words like mutations, which is nothing but changes in our DNA or our genetic material, which is, influences our characters, how we look, how we behave, how our body functions, and so on. So when these changes happen in the DNA, they will happen separately in this population and separately in the other population. And then over a long time, as generations go by, as these changes keep on accumulating, slowly they will cause changes in how this population looks, how this population looks, or how the body in this body of organisms in this population functions in that, right? So that keeps happening. The second thing that can happen is, of course, the environment can change separately in the two parts, or the populations may find different kinds of environments once they are separated from each other. And then depending on how well adapted those organisms are for the new environment, some of them will survive, some of them will not survive. And so that will also lead to changes. But these changes again are separate in one population and separate in the other population. And if this process goes on for many, many, many generations, ultimately what you can get is these two populations will become very, very different from each other, because they have had accumulated these changes over hundreds, thousands, or even millions of generations, right? And that's how we end up getting two different species. Now, you might say, oh, chimpanzees and humans, okay, there are some similarities, but there are so many differences, right? So how can this happen? But again, what we have to keep in mind here is that this happens over many, many, many generations. And you can see here the time it shows is about more than 5 to 10 million years. So that's a long, long time. And even if there are small changes happening happening, which we can see or feel, but over a long time, over many generations, they can accumulate into many different changes. So that's what happens when one ancestral population is branching into two. And then again, what can happen is, of course, these species, right now we are in the present, but in the future, population of chimpanzees could again become separated for different reasons. Population of humans may in the future become separated for different reasons, and then they may evolve again, branch into two different populations and evolve on their own separately, right? I will stress on some points again, just to make it clear. This evolution should happen independently. If these two populations, which let's say geographically become separate, if they keep interacting or intermingling for whatever reasons, then this is not going to work. They are not going to become two different species over time, right? Because they keep intermingling, intermixing. So their characteristics are not going to evolve into separate kind of characteristics, because they are not changing independent of each other. They are dependent on each other. So that condition has to apply for this to work. Okay. So here is what I was talking about. If this process keeps on happening again and again and again, what we know today is that the same process happening right from the origin of any kind of biological organisms, very small organisms looking like bacteria, very tiny and single cells. Over time, when this process repeated, organisms, their populations kept branching and becoming different from each other. This has given rise to all the diversity that we see today in organisms, right? And so this includes not only animals. So you can think of animals like humans, us, chimpanzees, monkeys, etc., but also all the other animals that we see around, big and small, insects, other kinds of small organisms that we know. And then some of the animals or microorganisms like fungi, and also plants, and also bacteria, and there are many different types of bacteria. So all of these have evolved in because of the same process just happening over and over and over again. So this was what Darwin and Wallace, they set out to explain how come we have this huge amount of diversity on Earth, and then it was explained through this theory of evolution that they developed. Okay. So now what I'm going to talk about is what actually happens in when we say that when two populations separate and then they evolve on their own independently, what is happening inside, okay, the population. So you can think of again chimpanzees, the ancestor of chimpanzees and humans separating into two kind of species. Now I'm going to talk about what happens on one branch here. And this is called as microevolution sometimes. So micro because it is happening within a population, like what is happening. Okay, so this graph might look complicated, but I'm going to slowly explain what it means.
Sir, can you show the definition of microevolution?
Yeah, sure. So the definition says changes in characters through mutation and selection. Okay, so this
Sir,
is
there was a previous slide on archaeoeukaryotes. And sir, in school, I have not yet studied about evolution. So can you please brief me on what these two are? I know bacteria, but not these two.
Yeah. So these are just type of, so archaea are just another type of bacteria, and eukaryotes, all these plants, animals, fungi, together we call them eukaryotes. And yeah, so the reason for that, it will take a long time to discuss, I think, but these are just names for different groups of organisms. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Yeah, so let me just go through this diagram quickly. So you can think of this diagram is going from left to right. Now, again, let's keep in mind, I'm talking of one branch, how it's evolving. Okay, so not the two branches. I'm talking of one branch, how it evolves after it has separated from the ancestor. Okay, so you can think of these dots as individual organisms in a population. So this is on the left vertical, this column would be the starting population. And then wherever you see these branches, this is actually one organism giving rise in the next generation to two or more organisms, right? And these are connected by these lines. Now you will see that some of the organisms in this first starting population, they give rise to one other organism. Some of them give rise to two other organisms. And I don't think there is an example where there are it gives rise to three other organisms. Okay. And then some of them, they don't give rise to any other organism in the next generation. Now, so you get this next generation. And then again, in that generation, some of the individuals, they give rise to one other offspring, as we say, and then some organisms, individuals, they give rise to two, and so on. And this keeps on happening. Now, in between, what can happen is you can get what are called as mutations. So mutations, as I was explaining before, are just changes in our genetic material or DNA, which can cause changes in how we look, how our body functions, what is happening inside us, and so on. So this one dot here, what this shows is this individual, when it gave rise to the offspring in the next generation, there's some mutation that happened which caused this new offspring to look or to be different than the parent generation. Okay. And then the process continues. This new individual can again give rise to a number of individuals in the next generation, and so on. Okay. So the population goes on changing like this, and then you can see here there's another mutation which happened in this individual in this offspring. And then that offspring gave rise to two individuals, and then in the next generation, this one gave rise to one, and so on. But then you will see that what happens here is that this individual gives rise to three other individuals, and then you will see in the process again, some give rise to one, some give rise to two, and three, and so on. What you will see is by the end of this, if we think of this as the recent population, you will see that now the population is made up of only green colored individuals, right? And how did this happen? Because starting somewhere here, this new individuals with this new mutation, they were able to produce, on average, they were able to produce more offspring than the other colored individuals. So here these individuals or these individuals, on average, every generation, these are leaving ahead more and more offspring, and therefore the population by the end, it gets there is a change in the population itself, because there are now more of these individuals with this particular kind of mutation. So when there are changes on average in the number of individuals that are surviving or reproducing and giving rise to the next generation, this is what we call as natural selection. And that can happen because of the environment, because maybe this mutation benefited these individuals in whatever environment was there, or it's possible that the environment changed in such a way that these the individuals which did not have the mutation, they could not survive as much as these other individuals. So whenever there is a change in the survival of different individuals carrying different mutations, natural selection will happen, and as a result of that, one kind of, or one variation of individuals, one variant of individuals will contribute more to the next generations, and then slowly the entire population will change. So this process of mutations and this selection that happens is what we call as microevolution. And again, you have to imagine that I don't know, like here there are maybe 15 to 20 generations, but this process is going to continue again and again and again. And, maybe in the future there will be other mutations that happen, and then some of them will survive more, some others will survive less. And then the population will keep on changing, accumulating these changes over time. So this is
Sir,
what is happening in,
I have
just
noticed
one
on
second,
that map
just one second, let me finish.
that's
So the same thing you can imagine happens on each of these branches. After they separate here, you imagine the same diagram happening here. Generation after generation changes are happening, and then there are separate changes happening on this branch generation after generation. And so here the population looks very different after a long time, and here the population looks very different after a long time. Okay, yeah. Can you say what you were saying now?
You should be able to unmute yourself now.
yeah, I have noticed like some of the starting individuals
Mm-hmm.
have been wiped out after their birth. Like they haven't given an offspring.
Yes. So that exactly, yeah. So there are two reasons why it can happen. One is again, it can happen just by chance, because there's always competition in a given population. There is always competition amongst organisms. So it can happen that by chance some of the individuals do not have a chance to reproduce successfully or contribute offspring to the next generation. So that's one. Second is it may happen because of the environment, because those individuals may not be well adapted to the environment, or they may actually have I mean, the environment may change in such a way that it's not suitable for them, so they can get wiped out. So yes, your observation is correct, and the reasons for that, one is either it could be because of competition and by chance some of them get wiped out, or it could be because of the environment. So that's how it
Like
is.
some of them, like what the red ones are like the blue ones, but like more back in time, like more older.
Older,
Some which
yes,
have
but
taken
you'll
like
see,
more space. And I've noticed some of the black dots also went, but there are only like two went to the end.
yes, these two, correct. Yes, so this is what happens in evolution. So all your observations are right, and what you have to imagine now is this is happening in a diagram. You imagine this happening in a population of organisms. If you have observed butterflies, this will happen to butterflies. If you observe plants, it will happen to plants, and the same thing can happen to different organisms. Okay, and that's how evolution proceeds. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I think we have about 30 minutes more. So I'm going to, this is just the basic process of evolution that I have tried to explain. Now we will talk of some of the examples of evolution that are, I think, are interesting. And I've called these evolution expresses, okay? Because I have picked them in a particular way because of course, the word expresses might give a hint about the speed at which this evolution happened. So far we have seen chimpanzees and humans. It took 10 million years, right? That's a long time. Giraffes to develop long necks also took a long time, few million years, and so on. But so the question is, does it take that long always? And then some of you have already asked this question. It may not take that long, so why or why not? So let me start with this example of the moths. So this is a tree bark which looks more like before the pollution due to industrial evolution started, and this is after the pollution developed. And you can see the black moths, you can see very easily, and the birds would be able to see them easily and pick on them. But then there are these white moths which I'm not even sure you are able to see, like one is here, one is here. They're very difficult to see, so they are not going to get predated and so on, right? But here you'll see that the black moths are now, you cannot even make out where the black moths are. And so after the industrial revolution, when there was pollution, the black moths will have an advantage and their population will increase. So this is what people have observed, that So if this was before the Industrial Revolution, the frequency, let's say almost 100% of the moths were white or these with white specks. And then after the Industrial Revolution, almost all the moths were colored black, right? So now think about the giraffes, how long it took the neck to become long. And now think of these moths where you initially had almost 100% white colored population, which became almost 100% black colored population. So how much time do you think this would have taken? Maybe you can just quickly put a number, whatever you think, how many years it took in the chat box. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. So there is a range of answers. Some of you are saying 100, some of you are saying 500, 1,000, millions, etc. So one thing is, it cannot be millions, right? Because we are talking of before Industrial Revolution and after Industrial Revolution. So it was because of humans and during, the time Industrial Revolution happened. Yeah. So it's definitely not millions of years, but let's see. So let me, I'm trying to, yeah. Okay. So now some of you are saying 2 decades, 3 decades. Okay. I'm not able to close my chat for some reason. Yeah. Okay, so this is when this data was actually collected. So the first set of data was collected in 1848. Now this is in one particular place in Britain. And then the second set of data which is shown was collected in 1895. So this is about 50 years it took when we were able to observe these kind of changes. Yeah. And it could have happened faster because these are only the years in which they were studied. So if someone would have studied it in 1860, 1870, 1880, maybe they would have also seen these black populations. We don't know. Maybe people have observed, but they have not, we don't have the record. So that's also possible and so on, right? So one thing to notice here is that the difference is so much that this is not one person's work, or this is not one scientist who was looking at the moths in 1848 and then the same scientist in 1895 looking at the moths. There were many different people working on the moths, and then they were looking at they were studying the same thing, and they have reported their results. And then now, after we see all these reports, we can make this comparison and say that, okay, it took so many years. Okay, so evolution can be pretty fast in some of the cases. Now, the second example is these finches, these birds that we talked about, which are shown on the left, and you can see the difference between the small beaks and the large beaks. So what happened is there are again these two scientists, Rosemary.
Could you just close the chat box? It's blocking the screen.
Yeah, so I'm not able to. Okay.
Maybe when you share, just share the browser window and not the desktop.
I see. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Is it gone now?
Yes, now it's only the browser.
Yeah, great. So so there are these scientists, Rosemary Grant and Peter Grant, who had been studying these finches on these islands in South America for many years. So they went there every year, made a lot of observations, collected a lot of data, measured the shape of the beaks and the length and the size and so on. And then they analyzed all of that data. And what they realized and figured out is that on one of the islands, in 1 or 2 years when they were there, there was a sudden drought. So there was no rains, and there was less water. And so what happened was the trees, the fruit trees, some of the trees were not able to produce as many fruits, and there were not as many seeds and so on. And this affected the small seeds much more. And there were few of those. But then the large seeds and the hard seeds were available. And then only those finches which could eat these hard seeds or break those hard seeds and could get the food out of them, they survived more and more. And therefore, what happened was, this graph shows the bill size or the beak size. So the average beak size actually went up rapidly in 2 to 3 years, in fact. Okay. And this is, I think someone asked the question some time ago about the moths, that is it that one of the populations was simply killed and then that's why we see more of the other? So in the case of moths, it's not like that, because the population size itself did not change in that case. So earlier, whatever was the population size, a percentage of that was white moths, and then after these 50 years or so, whatever was the population, it was still a large population. The percentage of it was much more were black moths. But in the case of finches, what you pointed out was true. The total number of birds itself went down because a lot of the small beaked finches were not able to survive. But the result is the same. That is, at the population level, now you have more of the large beak ones compared to the small beak ones. But the overall population is smaller, yes. So that happened. But then what is interesting is it went back. So after in the subsequent years, when there was enough rain, the seeds were produced in abundance. Then again, finches with all sizes of beaks could survive and reproduce, and so the average again went down and the population went up, right? So this is still evolution, but it's a transient, we can say, evolution, where the population changed for a few years and then it changed back after a few years, right? So as the environment changed, this happened. Okay. So these are 50 years, and this was a temporary change which happened for a few years and then it went back. Now let's talk about what are the fastest express, like we say, fastest trains. What are the fastest examples of evolution that we know of? And this again goes back to someone had asked the question about why some organisms evolve slow and some fast, or change slow and fast. So I'm going to talk about a few examples. First is bacteria which are resistant to antibiotics. You all must have heard, when we get sick because of some infections, we take antibiotics. But what is happening over many years now is that the bacteria have also become resistant. Like the antibiotics are not able to kill them so quickly, and so the infections take longer to get cured, right? So that is what we mean by the bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. And what people have realized, that bacteria are really, really fast at becoming resistant. So this is a timeline from about 1935 to 40s, when the first antibiotic was discovered by Alexander Fleming, that is penicillin, and then up to, this graph goes up to 2005. On the top, it shows the new types of antibiotics which were invented or discovered by us humans. And then you will see at the bottom the year in which the bacteria became resistant to those particular antibiotics, right? So for example, sulfonamides were being used already in 1936, and then after a few years we found that bacteria have become resistant. Penicillin, actually the resistance was already known before actually penicillin started getting used. Then for some of the other antibiotics, within a year the bacteria became resistant, or we found bacteria which were resistant to these antibiotics, and so on. And that keeps on happening again and again. So this is not specific to different antibiotics, but what we think now is that this is a general pattern, that bacteria are able to become resistant to antibiotics very quickly. And so much that it has now become a large problem that bacteria have started becoming resistant to many antibiotics. So they're resistant to multiple antibiotics. Okay. So at the global scale, we know that this happens in a few years. Now, I will show you one kind of a video which shows the same process happening in a lab. I hope you will be able to. Okay, I'm going to share my sound. I will play it for 2 seconds. Let me know if you can hear the sound, and then I will continue.
We can hear the sound.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish. except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal Petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Yeah. So this is a fascinating experiment that was done a few years ago by one of the labs in Harvard, where you just saw the video, so I'm not going to repeat it. But basically, you can see within 10 to 11 days that bacteria have become resistant to 1,000 times more antibiotic than they were used to before. And this we can see with our own eyes, right? And it follows the same process. You must have realized the branching pattern, which was shown in this video. It's very similar to the branching pattern we discussed earlier, right? So this is one of the fastest kind of examples of evolution that we can see with our own eyes in the lab. Let me go ahead. We can take questions on this later. Basically, what is happening inside, if you want to look at the cell level, is that there is a population of normal bacteria, but there are few which can resist the antibiotics. You get the antibiotics, the remaining are killed, and then the one which survives, which is resistant, it takes some time for it to grow into a new population, and then over time, the whole population is taken over, or the resistant ones become the whole population. And then, in this plate, the same process was happening again and again at each increasing concentrations. And what's surprising is the speed, right? It's only in 10 to 11 days. Okay. Now, we all have unfortunately had the experience of a similar kind of evolution happening around us a few years ago, which is still going on, right, in the background. So this is, of course, the COVID virus, and what is shown here. So my intention is not to go into the graph, but just look at the timeline. We all know this, and you must have heard these words called alpha variant, delta, and BA, and Omicron, and I think now it's JN1, and so on, right? And in a span of few years, or within the same year, actually, many of these variants came about. And this is another example of rapid evolution that we have been able to experience, and so some of the people who are working with this have seen with their own eyes and analyzed it. Now, the interesting thing I wanted to share here is that this kind of evolution doesn't only happen outside us or in the environment, but for a tiny organism like the virus, when it infects us, our body itself becomes the environment for the virus. And the same evolution process which is happening outside in the environment can also happen inside us. And so this is one example where you can see when we get infected, it's with few virus particles, and then they grow inside our body. And then what happens is there are mutations which happen in the virus inside our body, and then you can get like different types of mutations. Some of them can grow more than the original virus. Some of them might grow less. And then over time, as our body fights or as we take medicines, the infection goes down and the viruses inside us are killed. Now, so this is how evolution can happen inside us. And you can imagine when a host individual infects another individual, it happens somewhere in the middle, right? Before we are cured, we might infect someone else. And so from this stage where there are various mutations which have happened, either the original virus or the mutated virus, that can be passed on to another individual. And then now the evolution goes out of the within the host. It now transfers into the population, and then the virus keeps evolving from one host to the other also, right? So this is the same diagram, but then now I'm showing what is happening at the population of the host, not the virus. But you imagine this is the virus which is there in one of the hosts, and then let's say it keeps on infecting more and more hosts. In the beginning, it will be the same virus because it takes time for the mutations to happen and accumulate. But then over time, you will see that some viruses will mutate and they will pass from one individual to the other, and so on. And if they are good at it, if one of the mutation makes the virus better at spreading, then it's going to spread to more individuals. And then over time in the host population, what will happen is one type of virus or one variant of the virus will take over. And this is what we will call, I mean, you could think of this as the green as the original and red as maybe the first variant, which spread rapidly, which is the alpha. And then the same process will repeat with these red infecting multiple individuals. They may again get mutated, and then the newer mutated one will spread to more people, and so on. And that process, if it keeps going on, instead of showing those individual dots, now this is all like a continuous graph, but you can think of one time point here as one generation in which the virus has spread into the host population. And then over time, some of the like if you take a snapshot here, you will see that the alpha variant has infected many more individuals, but then over time some other mutation happened. We called it the delta mutation, that spread to others. Then over time another mutation happened here, that spread to the entire population, and so on. These waves are still going on. But over time, what has of course happened is, because of the vaccines and the medicines that we are taking, we have become kind of immune. So we are not necessarily feeling the same effect of the virus on us, but the virus is still evolving. Okay, so this diagram stops at 2022, but this is still going on. And so there are websites, I think I'll share the link later, which will be emailed to you. There are websites where you can track this evolution. So scientists are studying using DNA. They are studying how this evolution is still going on. Okay. So that's about the COVID virus. Now, I see that we are quite getting close. So I will wrap up in 5 minutes and leave at least 5 minutes for questions. So these are things going on outside: antibiotic resistance evolving in bacteria, and then the COVID virus and so on. Now, what we have done as humans is we have tried to replicate this process of evolution in the lab itself, and also tried to control it. So I'll show a few examples. So some people, what they did was they started with yeast, right? You all have, we all eat yeast as part of bread and so on. So, but you can also grow the yeast in the lab. And so they started growing yeast. What they did was something interesting. So they let so you put yeast in some liquid food and you let it grow and keep the test tube just stationary. And then what will happen is some of the yeast will go down, and you use a machine called a centrifuge. You can rotate it so that all the yeast will go down. Then you take, what is shown in the last tube here, you take a little bit out of that cells and again put it back in a new medium. and then again continue the process, and you do this cycle over and over and over again. So what this is called as artificial selection, because you are deciding which part of the population to select and start a new generation. So here they are taking whatever settles to the bottom. Now the beginning population is shown here in this microscopic image. You can see that it looks like a single cell, which is tiny. And then over time, actually what happens is, because we are taking only the heavier kind of yeast again and again and again, over many and many generations, we start getting only these large yeast aggregates. Okay. And then if you actually look at the test tubes after many generations, the ancestor, whereas it looked like this because they were all single tiny cells, over many generations for the yeast, that's many generations for the yeast. But in terms of human time, it's just a few months that you start seeing this kind of a evolved population. Okay. And under the microscope, it starts looking like this big mess of like cells, filaments entangled with each other. Now, not only that, see, you can get aggregation just if you keep something, it will aggregate, right? But evolution, one of the properties we did not discuss is that it has to propagate to the next generation. So if it happens in one generation and then it goes back, that's over time, right? It's not going to be evolution. So what happens, although in this case, is I will show you this diagram of how the original yeast, it actually grows and divides. Okay, I just play it for a short time so you can see the single cells dividing and so on. Whereas after the evolution that happened in the lab, you will see that the yeast starts dividing in a different way, right? It makes these big clumps and the clumps start breaking from each other. So these became multicellular organisms rather than what was before, which was single-celled organisms. Okay, so this is one of the examples of how evolution has been used in the lab. And then what some of the scientists they did was they actually moved this whole process from organisms to molecules. So we all know about proteins, right? Like hemoglobin, for example, is a protein, or in our muscle, there is a protein called myosin. So these are all proteins. So what these people figured out was a way to carry out evolution of molecules rather than organisms. And they got a Nobel Prize for that. And if you know, Nobel Prize is given if there is some application, right? It's going to make a difference to human civilization. And so what can be the use of evolution, right? Yeah, and I show this diagram. They kind of put Darwin in a test tube and made the evolution to happen in a test tube, and they got the Nobel Prize for that. And they say the Nobel laureates in chemistry have taken control of evolution and used it for purposes that bring the greatest benefit to humankind. Enzymes produced through directed evolution are used to manufacture everything from biofuels to pharmaceuticals. So enzymes are basically proteins which in our body do the work of digesting our food and many different things. And in industry, they are used for various things in food industry, in biofuels, in producing medicines and so on. So they developed a process where they can evolve the enzymes in the lab and make better enzymes out of them. And the cycle goes something like this. You take a few different types of molecules. In the lab, you introduce mutations in them. Then out of the mutated molecules, protein molecules, you select the ones which is giving you a better function. And then you take that, and then again, you create a larger population out of it. Again, you mutate that population. Again, you check how they're performing. Then you select the better ones and again make copies of that. Again, introduce mutations. And so this is just like evolution, and you keep repeating that cycle. By the end, you will get a much better molecule than what existed in the beginning. And this process has been applied to develop many different kinds of enzymes. And I'll just show one example of the output. So someone developed a plastic degrading enzyme by evolving it in the lab and making it better and better and better. And you can see what this first flask, what it has is actually there is a plastic bottle which they've crumpled and put it inside it. And then within about 6 days, you see that the entire bottle has dissolved by the enzyme that they developed in the lab, right? So you can develop many new kind of enzymes or better enzymes using this process in the lab. Okay, and I don't want to miss this. So there are a lot of examples. So there's a question that we ask, are humans still evolving? So I will just show one example of the recent evolution of humans. So 3 places in the world, Tibet, where there are very high mountains, Mount Everest, for example, Ethiopia, where also there are very high altitude mountains, and then Andes in South America, where also, and these places have been populated by different groups of humans in the last few thousand years. So this is the interesting part. So this is not millions of years, but this is also not few years. This is few thousands of years. They have developed various kind of adaptations, and they have changed from the other populations in different ways. And although they live in similar kind of environments, because of the height, they have all developed different combinations of adaptations. So Tibetans, for example, they have normal hemoglobin, but they have rapid breathing, and their blood vessels are expanded so that it can carry more blood. Whereas in Ethiopia, they have high hemoglobin, but more oxygen in the blood, and so on, right? And in the Andes Mountains, they have high hemoglobin and they have more RBCs in their blood. So in various places, these populations have evolved in the past few thousand years, and they have changed at the molecule level, at the genetic level, as well as at the population level. And this is one example of how human evolution has been progressing in the recent past. Okay, so thank you for listening to me, and we can take more questions now.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you, Saurabh, that like the chat has, you probably noticed it's just been going wild the whole time. Everyone's been asking questions and answering questions, and I've been trying to do my bit. So thank you for that really, really engaging class. To start off with, I'll be collating all the questions that are in the chat and I'll get them to you. But to start off with, we had a special request. So one of our audience members, Uma, is a dentist, and she wanted to share about what evolution has done to wisdom teeth. So, Uma, if you'd like to share that with us.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone has heard of wisdom teeth. So an interesting exercise. I think most of you are probably below the age of 18. So if you count the number of teeth in your mouth, you're very likely to find that you have about 28 teeth. And those of you who have older brothers or sisters who are 18 and above, they would have struggled with getting a tooth at that age. So the wisdom tooth is the last molar. Molar is that the back tooth, which erupts or which comes into the mouth around between the ages of 18 and 25. And most people have problems with it, with it when it comes out or after it comes out. It usually comes out crooked. Sometimes it comes out only half. Sometimes it remains fully buried inside the bone, and it hurts, and there is inflammation, etc. So, there's somebody saying, I know why wisdom teeth exist. Humans needed to chew harder food. Oh, very good. Excellent. Yes. So what has happened, and this is a change that, yes, absolutely right, Terry. What has happened over the last few hundred years, this is a change that has happened not thousands or millions of years ago, but over the last few hundred years, because our diet has changed. We used to eat more of the food that we used to eat was more raw and not so processed, or not very cooked also. But now we eat extremely soft and processed food. So that has actually resulted in the need for less force to chew our food, and because of which the muscles that we use for chewing have grown smaller, and therefore our jaw size has also grown smaller. So because of this, the space available on the jaw for the last tooth to erupt has reduced. And this is the reason why why when the wisdom tooth comes out, it causes so much trouble because there isn't enough space on the jaw for the last tooth to erupt. So that's what evolution, I mean, that's a direct experience of how evolution has affected us, which those of you who have not yet got your wisdom teeth are likely to experience when it erupts, when it comes out into your mouth. Not everyone has this problem. There are people who still have large jaws and who are able to get their wisdom tooth without too much trouble. But this is just an example that, yes, you're absolutely right, Milan. Since the jaw is smaller, the wisdom tooth it causes pain while erupting. Absolutely right. So yeah, just wanted to just share about that. Thanks so much, Sidhu.
Yeah. Thanks, Uma.
Sir,
Thank you.
by any chance, did you use this book for the class?
Oh, that looks like no, but that looks like an interesting book. Can you share in the text? I can't read the title very clearly, but please share it in the text.
It's a mirrored.
Oh, super
Sir,
simple
it's super
biology.
simple biology.
Okay. No, I've never heard of this book, but
Because
I'll-
I've noticed most of the pictures you presented were very similar, and like most of the context were very similar from this book in evolution.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So like these examples are, yeah, you might see them in many places. Yeah. These are popular examples of evolution. That's true.
Okay.
But if you see any new examples, please, you can, maybe, I don't know if there is a way for the students to share with each other. You can share with others also later. Okay.
So some of the questions that were there in the chat that I think we've not answered so far and are interesting. Sir, after a few thousand years, will humans be able to cope with pollution better than us due to evolution? If yes, then how?
Yeah. So I think, thanks for the question. It's always difficult to, I mean, of course, confidently answer what will happen after 1,000 years. But I can give you a similar example, okay? So what we know from the past is that humans, so we cannot see it probably in the way we look, but in our body, inside our body, our immune system has evolved to counter infectious diseases, because COVID is just one which happened now, but there have been infectious disease, huge epidemics which have happened in the past many, many times, right? So what has happened during those, what we think has happened during those epidemics is that some individuals could not, who did not have a resistance via their immune system, they did not survive. And then some of them who had a variation in the immune system by which they were able to resist, they could survive, right? And the immune system is very complex, so there are many ways to resist infectious diseases. So the evolution has happened in different ways. So yes, I think as pollution becomes more and more problem, what we know today, for example, is that pollution actually does result in the death of many people, right? We may not, it's not like sudden, but we know that we get different kinds of respiratory diseases and other diseases because of pollution. And so if there are people you could think of things like maybe inside our body there might be like chemicals or enzymes which will kind of get rid of the pollutants more quickly, for example. Okay. So maybe if there is a variation like that in some people, then maybe they will be able to resist pollution better. And then maybe after 1,000 years, because of repeated exposure to pollution, we all will become better at, or not we all, but the human population will become better at resisting pollution. So that's just one example that's possible. What exactly will happen, we don't know, but because there can be, many ways to counter pollution. The other is, of course, I hope what we can do is that we can reduce pollution before it comes to that, right? So, okay.
Then another question that got a lot of lot of action in the chat was, why do we evolve? What is the reason behind it? And also, why did we stop evolving? most of the action was around why did we stop evolving, but I'd like you to answer the why do we evolve?
Why do we evolve? So yeah, that's a great question, I think. And there is no reason why we evolve, but I think it's because of the way we, I mean, all the organisms, we not humans, because of the way all the biological organisms function and the way they reproduce, right? Because we have a genetic system, and one generation to the next generation, it looks similar because the genes are passed to the next generation. But at the same time, there is some variation which can happen because of mutations. So as long as this is the system in which biological organisms function, there will always be evolution as a result of this. And then, of course, you have to add the environment is different in different places, and it also keeps changing, right? And all organisms, like depending on the variation, they will be more adapted or less adapted. So there is no option in one way because of these rules, or the way the biology is, like genetics, because one generation looks similar to next generation, and also there is some variation. So that's one part. And the second part is because there is environment which is different in different places and is changing all the time. So, if you put these two things together, then evolution will happen. Like, there's no reason for it, but because of these two things, it will happen. By the way, I didn't mention another experiment which people did in the lab. They grew a simple bacterium in just a very simple food medium, where there are only 3-4 different types of chemicals which were present as food. And it has been about more than 70,000 generations of the bacteria. Of course, for bacteria, the generations happen much faster. So in human time, it has been 25 to 30 years. So the bacteria have still not stopped evolving, even after 70,000 generations, even when the environment is kept the same. So they're growing them again and again in the same environment. But even now, they're getting slowly, slightly better in that environment. And mutations are constantly happening. And so evolution is still going on even in that situation. So yeah, so there's no way I think it can stop. So I think I guess that answers the other question also. What can happen is, for humans, you may not realize that we are evolving. So for two reasons. One is that we don't necessarily evolve in the way we look. As I told, immune system, internally we are evolving because the immune system may be functioning differently than in the past. So we are evolving. So we may not realize that we are evolving unless we study it in detail. That's one thing. Second thing is, it's of course slow. So we may not, of course, humans, one generation takes about 20 to 30 years. So the entire population, or a large part of population, cannot change in one generation, right? So it will take a few generations, and then individually we are not there, or we won't be there to see how evolution has happened. So we can only study the past, how it has happened, and from that we know that we have kept on evolving. As I said, hemoglobin is last few thousand years, and someone gave the example of kidneys, expanded kidneys in these divers. So there's a population in I think in Southeast Asia, where they dive deep for a long time to get food to hunt. So they have evolved. Yeah, the Bajau people. Yeah. So yeah. So evolution will go on. It has not stopped.
Feel free to unmute if you have a question, because we've finished the chat questions for now.
Sir, aren't there some diseases that once enter the body, they cannot be stopped?
Do you have
such as cancer?
Cancer, okay. But yeah, so in some sense, yes, in some sense, no. So in some cases, we are able to stop cancer by medicines or, other ways. But for many people, yes, we are not able to stop cancer. So if you want to think of the human population, yes, we have still not been able to control cancer, right, in that sense. Now, yeah, just let me finish 1 second. Interesting thing is, cancer cells themselves evolve inside our body. So what we talked about, antibiotics, like how bacteria become resistant to antibiotics, like that cancer cells inside our body can become resistant to the medicines, because there is a population of cancer cells. We take one medicine, many of them die, but some of them survive, which are resistant to that medicine, and then they grow again, right? And that's part of the reason why we are not able to control cancer at the population level. So yes, there is evolution happening in some of the diseases, and that's part of the reason why we are not able to control them.
Sir, and what about the Black Death?
I also wanted to make another point regarding the disease point that you brought up, that it's a very interesting thing to think about from an evolution perspective. So while so there are diseases like Ebola. You might have heard of it. It's a disease that's present in West Africa. If you get Ebola, your mortality rate is very high. Okay, it's a terrible disease, and you're very likely to die. The world is not worried about an Ebola pandemic. The world is worried about a COVID-19 pandemic where you get a cold. It also has bad things, but the thing is, there's this trade-off. If a disease is very good at killing you, if it's very fast at killing you, then it also has very little time where it can spread to someone else. And therefore, such a disease is more likely to die out than something like a cold, which all it does is it inconveniences you, but it also gives you lots of time to sneeze around everyone and spread. So there's a trade-off that any disease has between killing you and keeping you alive so that you can transmit it to other people. I'm simplifying things, but just from what we've learned today, that's something that you can think about. Sorry, I think someone else was asking a question.
Yeah, so there's a lot of what I love about this session is there a lot of discussion amongst the audience which is going on, which they're answering each other's questions. So I think that's great.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Will genetic engineering modify our viewpoint on evolution?
That's a great question. So so if I don't know if you are referring particularly to humans, but the cycle that I showed in this artificial evolution for chemicals where they got the Nobel Prize, they actually use a lot of genetic engineering in that process, because I covered it very quickly, but the way mutations are introduced and the way you select the better performing molecules and so on. So there is already a lot of genetic engineering going on at that level. Okay, so there are lots of applications in the laboratory evolution for genetic engineering, and that has got them the Nobel Prize, because that has changed for good, like many of these things. Second is, if you're asking in the human context, so one is right now the genetic engineering of humans, it's accessible to very few people, right? And evolution, as we saw, happens at a population level. So unless genetic engineering becomes so common and so successful that we are able to do it for the large fraction of population, I don't think it will change the way evolution will happen for humans. Now there is an interesting another interesting application of evolution that is happening in genetic engineering in a way of other organisms. So people have developed, some of you may have heard in the news, they have developed some kind of mosquitoes which are genetically engineered, and when you leave them in the population outside, they breed with other mosquitoes but make them sterile, or in some cases kill them, right? And so that can alter evolution on a large scale, like that genetic engineering being done by humans of other organisms, which can influence the evolution of those other organisms in some sense, right? So that's possible. But that's also because mosquitoes, the way their ecology and behavior is, you can leave a few in the population and then they will propagate, and then it can alter the course of evolution. And we don't know, they might become resistant to it and so on. So there are many other more possibilities. But yes, so these are, I can think of 3 ways in which genetic engineering relates to evolution. Nice question. Thank you.
And with that, we're at 15 minutes over time. And so thank you all, like 75% of you have stayed 15 minutes over time, and that's a big deal. So once again, I'd like you all to unmute and let's just say a big thank you to Saurabh for what's been a really lovely session. And if you can turn your video on so that we can say bye to each other, because in addition to this being a really great session where we've learned really great information, you've also interacted with each other beautifully. Like it's been so normally in master classes or online things, if I'm not the one doing the talking, I'm not paying attention all that much. But the chat has been so full and so engaging. All of you have been talking to each other really, really well over here. So thank you so much for doing it. And this is really what we want to do. We want to build a community of learners who care for each other and like to learn together. Okay. So thank you so much. So feel free to unmute, say bye, say thank you to Saurabh, whatever you'd like. And we'll see you again 2 weeks from now at our next masterclass.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Saurabh.
Saurabh.
That
Thank
was
you,
a really
sir.
interesting class.
So
Thank you,
sir.
Sidhu,
Bye,
for-
sir.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.